the most important technology in the history of politics, and especially in elections, got its start on the battlefield, matured in poorly ventilated convention halls, and now dominates daily life, whether you like it or not. In 1937, Canadian inventor Donald Hings created a portable radio signaling system called the PACSAT for the Consolidated Mining and Smelting Company of Canada. 2 years later, Canada was at war with Germany, and the need for wireless in-the-field communication became, well, quite urgent. Those familiar scenes of officers radioing coordinates and calls of distress under fire, well, they didn't exist at the beginning of World War II, because the technology wasn't there. In 1940, the Galvin Manufacturing Company had developed a handheld transceiver called the SCR-536, the handy talkie. You hold it in your hand and you talk. The SCR designation stood for Signal Corps Radio, but its range was only 1/4 of a mile, which just wasn't that useful. So the US War Department commissioned Galvin Manufacturing to develop something closer to that Hings PACSAT, something with a few miles of range. The result was the SCR-300. And that's the image you know, a man with a large backpack, a phone receiver, and antenna. It was heavy, 35 pounds, mostly battery, but you could move with it. That's how it became the walkie-talkie. Communication had been something of a disaster for the Allies early in the war, especially in the North Africa campaign. But by the time of the invasion of Sicily in 1943, US forces were equipped with SCR-300 units that could call for support, refine artillery target coordinates, and more, all in real time and with range. The vacuum tube, one of the most underappreciated inventions in human history, made all of this possible. But was it making us too connected? In the August 1945 issue of Popular Science, an article about the use of military technology in post-war peacetime expressed a bit of concern about us being constantly available. There was even a drawing of a Dr. Jones being forced to get out of his car to communicate with his office via walkie-talkie. An Apple Watch with cellular would send Dr. Jones into a coma. Well, people did want to receive audio in the car. Radios were becoming standard, and Galvin Manufacturing's car radio model was so popular that they even changed their company name to match it. It was called the Motorola. And the moment we could talk and listen with portability, we wanted to show and see the same way. Just 1% of the US had a television in 1948. But a few stationary cameras did roll at the Republican and Democratic national conventions that year. And what happened? Well, we found out how unflattering the camera can be. One columnist wrote, if they could see themselves as a television audience does, they would sit down and weep. But it did suggest that the smoke-filled rooms of the past now had two-way mirrors and at least a little bit less smoke. The Heinel Radio News Service quoted H.W. Stewart as declaring that television, all at once, was bringing a new political consciousness to a sizable portion of the population. Just 4 years later, that 1% share of household television ownership was nearly 50%. And the number of TV sets grew from a few 100,000 to 18 million. And just in time, because 1952 was an extremely important election year. Harry Truman was finishing a run that started in the final year of World War II. It would be a new era in US politics. The Korean War had raged for 2 years as the United Nations struggled to manage the global chaos, and the US was crafting its role in post-war geopolitics. As Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union jockeyed for its own position in a nuclear-capable world. We started talking about space, and domestically, the civil rights movement's seeds were beginning to sprout. So the 1952 election was a big deal, and Republican Dwight Eisenhower, former Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe, and Democratic Governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson, were both going to get the close-up treatment, and 72 million Americans would be watching. Right before the conventions, Popular Science promised that a new Walkie-Talkie-Lookie would make it possible to pursue a presidential candidate or a delegate right up to the door of his bathroom. RCA had improved on the SCR-300 by using the Vidicon tube. One reporter could now haul around a 10-pound camera wearing a 50-pound backpack that sent both audio and video to a nearby station antenna, which then passed signals to a nationwide network of towers, waves, and coaxial cables connecting 104 stations. That's 98 more than the 6 in 1948. Gardner Sewell wrote that the ability to follow a subject anywhere was a thought to chill almost anyone, let alone the average politician. NBC's press release touted that it would bring viewers within elbow's reach of where news was breaking. And it was technologically amazing. The Walkie-Talkie-Lookie had 3 lenses which could be rotated to fit different purposes, while an army of traditional TV cameras also fed footage to mobile trucks that could edit and send newsreels within an hour. Modern news was being born. William McAndrew was in charge of NBC's TV coverage. He said, "I don't think the politicians realize that they're playing with dynamite. But that's just what they're doing." Sewell wrote that this level of exposure might lead to more thoughtful voting and better selection, concluding that television may prove to be one of the greatest aids to self-government ever developed. McAndrew got right to the point. The viewer will either think a party and convention is businesslike and efficient, or he'll think it's a bunch of clowns and he'll vote the other way. Now, Rosser Reeves was a sort of Don Draper. He's the reason you know that M&Ms melt in your mouth and not in your hands. And the Eisenhower campaign embraced his dynamic approach to television.
You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike. For president, hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington.
In contrast, historian David Halberstam said Stevenson complained about Ike selling the presidency like cereal. And Stevenson went out of his way to reinforce that he did not watch or even own a television. Eisenhower took his TV coverage seriously. Despite needing some makeup to tone down the reflection on his prominently bare forehead, he won in a landslide. He'd serve until 1960 when John F. Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon, in part because of a televised debate that boosted Kennedy's stock and tanked Nixon's. So to recap, the handy-talkie became the walkie-talkie, which led to the Walkie-Talkie-Lookie, later shortened to just the Walkie-Lookie, which by 1956 was called the Creepy Peepee, and by the time we had to slay a Demogorgon, we called all the portable radio transmitters walkie-talkies, and the video devices, well, we called them something else entirely. But along the way, the instant audio-visual access to our leaders changed the world forever. It can bring out the charm and confidence of a Kennedy or a Reagan. Or you can misspell potato, or scream your way out of contention.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House! Ah!
You know, if you wanted to divide all of global politics into 2 eras, before 1952 and after 1952, well, you probably wouldn't be wrong. We'll see you in the future.